Welcome back to another episode of the Alternative Medicine Success Stories podcast. Today's success story comes from an award-winning writer and producer. He's also a graduate of the Community Dharma Leaders Program at the Spirit Rock Meditation Center. He currently resides in New York, where he teaches inner-city students meditation and mindfulness, and he also writes content for the popular 10% Happier app. I'm thrilled to have him as a guest today. Please welcome Brian Simmons. Brian, how are you?
Doing well, Jordan. It's a pleasure to be with you today. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, thank you for joining us and taking the time out of your day to jump on this interview.
Yeah, and I know you're doing some good work covering an area that doesn't always get as much attention as it needs. So I'm very happy to have a conversation with you today.
Great. Well, let's just jump into who you are, your background, and how you got started with healing through mindfulness and meditation, and how it's I guess, yeah, just give us the whole background.
So my background into mindfulness began decades ago in the 1990s when, mindfulness was not really all that known. Now, I mean, you see the cover of Time magazine, you can't turn on television without someone talking about mindfulness. It's saturated our culture in many ways. But back then, that was not the case. So I began my mindfulness journey right after I graduated college. Ironically enough, the weekend I graduated college, I had panic attacks, and they were quite severe, which made no sense to me when it first happened. I thought I might be having a heart attack. This is even, in the infancy of the internet. So I couldn't Google, I couldn't any of this. So I went on this like 2-year journey to really figure out what's going on. And along the way, I found lots of things. One of the things was something called mindfulness meditation. I read a book by Jon Kabat-Zinn called Wherever You Go, There You Are. And it planted a powerful seed. And the mindfulness practice was not itself the source of an immediate cure of the panic attacks, although they did go away, in the first couple of years. But it left such an impression on me, this idea that we can be in the present moment.
Yeah.
As things are unfolding in our life, that something clicked in my brain. It was almost like I had been reunited with something I had forgotten.
Mm-hmm.
But I knew that I knew this somewhere in the recesses of my mind. So I began a daily meditation practice, which has gone really uninterrupted for the past few decades.
Wow.
Where I practice every single day. I haven't missed a day of meditation in, I think, 10 years. And I now teach it. I practice it. As you said, I've brought it to kids, inner city kids in New York City. I teach it to adults in Dharma centers. So it has transformed my life personally, professionally, emotionally. And as you mentioned, there's been a great deal of healing. Because in this mindfulness inquiry that I've engaged in for these decades, I've also come upon other modalities. So along the way, I also, got sick. We can get into that, and found other methodologies, modalities that brought me lots and lots and lots of healing. So that's kind of where my mindfulness is now. It's this, in some ways, it's kind of the bedrock of my life. I like to think that awareness is like this container, and it contains everything that happens in my world, my physical body, my health, my relationships, my professional relationships, my professional standings. There's nothing that I do that is not informed and held by awareness. And that's one of the tremendous gifts that mindfulness has brought to my life.
Yeah. Like you said, mindfulness is everywhere. And there are people still, though, that I'm finding out that don't know what mindfulness is. So if you could you break it down just to, like, in your best explanation of what being mindful is? What is practicing mindfulness?
Well, to quote my original inspiration, Jon Kabat-Zinn, he defines it, although people define it differently. He defines it, paraphrasing here, as non-judgmental awareness of the present moment. of the things that are happening in the present moment. So when you look at this kind of succinct definition, you see a couple different things. You see paying attention to the present moment. So this is one of those kind of platitudes that you hear about now. Oh, be in the present, be present, all of this. But the question arises, why? Why would one want to be present? In fact, I teach a course that I developed called What's So Great About the Present Moment?
Okay.
Because oftentimes the present moment sucks, right? So there could be pain, there could be emotional upheaval, there could be disappointment. At the
Hmm.
time of this recording, we're in the middle of COVID-19 quarantine.
Yeah.
So there's certainly an argument to be made for shouldn't we just space out? But mindfulness is this practice that has a radically different take, which is that maybe if we move closer to experience, even unpleasant, difficult experience, we can have a deeper connection to really our own life, the source
Hmm.
of our health, which is really just like our existence, happening, unfolding moment by moment. And if we live to be, if we're lucky, according to the statistical tables, we live to 78.2 years or whatever the time is, wouldn't it be kind of a better experience to be present for those moments
Yeah.
rather than be, avoiding and pushing things away and kind of mentally going to sleep and having large areas of like shadow that have been unexamined in our life, and then find that we get to 80 and we didn't really live fully. And you see sometimes there are people on their deathbeds that have these incredible realizations like, oh my God, I should have lived this way. I should have been more present for my wife, for my kids, for my job. Well, mindfulness is this training where you don't have to wait to be 80 on your deathbed and look back. This is kind of the wisdom of a person at the end of their life practiced right now, wherever you are in your life journey. And this idea of non-judgmental awareness means that whatever arises, pleasant, unpleasant, neutral experiences, we open up awareness. You could say we open up in some ways like our heart to what's happening. We're embracing rather than pushing things away. And this is a radical change in how we meet our life, how
Yeah.
we meet our moments. And it turns out that when you're aware, when you know that you know, and you lay out the welcome mat to what's happening, even things that you don't want to have happen, it turns out that a whole range of options oftentimes becomes clear that you weren't previously aware of. So this is not necessarily a technique that you do in order to change your experience and make it great. This is kind of like how it's sold. It's like mindfulness will change your life, it'll make it great. No, you could lose your job if you practice mindfulness. Your wife could leave you if you practice mindfulness. You could get sick. But how do you meet those moments? And what might be possible in those moments that you might be blind to if you're not training your mind and your heart in some kind of way? So that's what mindfulness really is. It's a training of your life to be fully engaged. I like to say life is a full contact sport. It
Yeah.
is. We get hit, we get disappointments, but it's like, how do we, like almost like a boxer, how do we bob and weave and navigate all of that? Mindfulness, moment to moment, is a training to show us how. It's a way to live.
You mentioned so many things there, and the one thing that stuck out to me is that you talked about how even though if you practice mindfulness, shitty things can still happen to you. And you are a living, breathing example of that. What the listeners don't know and they're about to find out is that you really struggled with chronic fatigue syndrome. And you have been practicing mindfulness well before you had that. And
Right.
then found out you had that as a practitioner of mindfulness. So could you explain what that was like? What exactly, what was chronic fatigue syndrome to you, and how you healed ultimately through your practice?
Well, I just want to do a little qualifier to your statement when you said if you practice mindfulness, shitty things can happen to you. If you practice mindfulness, shitty things will happen to you.
Okay.
If you don't practice mindfulness, shitty things will happen to you. So that's destined to all of
Yeah,
us. That's just life. No one gets a pass on that.
that's a good point.
So you're right. A very shitty thing happened to me, or maybe depending on where I am now when I reflect, maybe it seemed shitty at the time, but maybe it was a very positive thing.
Hmm.
So uh, roughly 2006, I live, as you say, in New York. I live in Astoria, Queens, vibrant community that I live in. And
Yeah.
I was going for a run in Astoria Park. They had this incredible track under the Triborough Bridge. And I was in peak physical condition. Because remember, I was coming off having had the panic attacks, having discovered mindfulness. And now I had this feeling of invincibility. I felt mindfulness would protect me from anything. I became very successful. I became a writer, producer for Comedy Central. I had
Hmm.
this career that had an upward trajectory. And then all of a sudden, I was running around the track and I saw that people were lapping me and I couldn't make sense of it because I was in, as I say, peak physical condition. And then it occurred to me, after a couple of rounds, oh, I'm sick. Right. I have I could feel that I had like a little sore throat, this kind of thing. And sure enough, it was a flu. And it lasted its normal 3 days, 4 days, 5 days. And then it kind of lingered into the second week, the
Hmm.
third week, the fourth week. And then I began to panic because it was like,
Oh,
whoa, where is this going? I went to, started to go to one doctor after the next, after the next. They couldn't really conclusively find anything. And the symptoms got worse. My immune system like completely collapsed. Um, People hear about chronic fatigue syndrome and they think, I'm tired too. Someone must be making this up. Please, if you get nothing else and you're listening to this right now, if someone tells you they have chronic fatigue syndrome, what they have is very, very, very serious. It is debilitating. It's the worst physical, agony I've ever been in my life.
wow.
Massive pain, massive migraines, bizarre symptoms. It would be a migraine 1 hour, then the next hour it's kind of like stomach issues.
Oof.
At night, during the night, there would be, I couldn't sleep. I would have my nerve endings would be firing. It was it was just horrible. I could go through 100 symptoms and they were all severe, but one of the worst was what they call post-exertional malaise, which means that if I exerted myself, I tried to go for a run or I
Hmm.
tried to do something, a normal activity, 24 hours later, I would get hit with almost what felt like a reaction, almost like an anaphylactic shock or something, where I would be, near bedridden for
Wow.
days or weeks.
Yikes.
Right. So this led to the conclusion, does this mean I can't exercise? Does this mean I can't climb to the top of this mountain that I'm going to in my career?
Hmm.
And then along the way, this is maybe 6 months in, 8 months in, I found a doctor who was like a world expert. And he basically said, if you keep pushing and you keep on this career that you're in and all of this, you may be permanently disabled.
Wow.
So, so what I ended up doing was I shifted careers into teaching, which I thought would lower my stress. How do you think that worked out? And, so I had my summers off and I remained sick with various, I felt better from time to time. I continued for the next decade to try every method I could find. And the problem is for anyone who might be sick and watching this, what I want you to hear, I completely understand the desperation of Googling your symptoms and saying, well, maybe it's the metal in my teeth. Maybe
Hmm.
it's the mold in my apartment. Maybe it's the this. There is no end to the people online who will tell you, yes, this is what's causing this. Yes, it's this. You will go bankrupt and exhaust your resources and your life and still never find a solution. I could
Wow.
tell you how this came about, but that would be a much, much longer story, but it's a very interesting one. But to cut to the chase, I kind of connected the dots in some kind of way 10 years into it, that maybe there was like a psychosomatic component to it, which needs a little unpacking. By
Hmm.
psychosomatic, I do not mean to say I was imagining symptoms. I was, you know, pretending to have strep throat 8 times in a row during winter. Like, no. Like physically, all of this stuff was happening,
Hmm.
but the genesis, it turned out, was being created from the mind. And if you're looking for more information on this is not just for chronic fatigue syndrome. This is for many, many, many conditions that don't have just a clear like diagnosis.
Hmm.
And it turned out that it was Dr. John Sarno, the famous back pain doctor who wrote the book Healing Back Pain, who passed away at in his 90s a couple of years ago. He figured out decades ago that when when people, especially of a certain personality type, kind of like the perfectionistic type, like what he calls a goodist, people who like want to be good people,
Hmm.
they tend to suppress like certain types of feelings and not look at certain things. And it turns out that if you suppress these things, they don't go away,
Interesting.
and they can manifest as innumerable physical maladies. Now, I rejected this whole idea at first
Hmm.
because in my mind, I'm Mr. Mindfulness. I'm going on meditation retreats for 5 weeks at a time with the best teachers on earth
Hmm.
in pure silence. No one's more dedicated than me. There's no way anything's happening in my experience that I'm not aware of.
Right.
But it's a tricky thing. And it turned out, by pursuing this over the course of a couple of years, I 100% healed in a way that is like just truly remarkable. I am 48 years old. I feel like I'm 22.
That's
I
great.
now work out as intensely as I did back then,
Hmm.
but I have the wisdom now of it. I'm not pushing and pushing and pushing and pushing. I'm approaching things I'm doing much, much differently. But what the whole lesson taught me is that healing is possible, even at the depths of despair, and not just a little healing. And this is not a guarantee for anyone out there, right? But I
Right.
know from my own personal experience and many, many other people I've met and seen that healing is completely possible, where you can go from no hope to, oh my God, I feel better than I've ever felt in my life.
That's incredible to to struggle for a decade. A decade. I mean, that is a long time to not be able to work out, to be on Google every day searching what the heck is wrong with me, and then to come to where you are now, where you're, working out like you did when you're in your 20s, and that's just an incredible journey, and all without medication,
Right.
and like it's all healing from the mind. And
One thing
what
I'd like
go ahead.
One thing I'd like to add about that, though, this is really important, especially if someone is watching this. And again, there's no guarantees that, I would encourage someone to look into this further. But if you find yourself in this position where you're completely desperate, the one correct thing that I did with my mindfulness practice that was dedicated, I set an intention throughout that entire period, as desperate as it was, that I may never be healed physically, but I will use this experience, this pain, to wake myself up. In my frame of reference, it was kind of like a spiritual awakening. I will
Mhm.
be more present. I will be more aware. No matter what the pain is, I will meet it in a certain type of way. And whether or not I get past this, or whether or not I even live past it, and there were many, many times I believed that I would not, that this was going to kill me, that it was, well, I am going to learn, I'm going to use this to mine it for, like, I hate to be cliche, like spiritual gold, spiritual riches. Like,
Hmm.
let me see what the mind is like at its most desperate. Let me see what it's like when I've had a glimmer of hope for the 10,000th time and then I get disappointed. Let me fully be there for this experience, and let me develop some sort of, like, compassion for myself and kindness for myself along the way. So it turns out that while I may not have been, like, physically healing along the way, in hindsight, I see that that was an emotionally, psychologically, spiritually healing period of my life. So we started out by saying it was shitty. When I look back, I'm like, yeah, I didn't like it, but I don't know that I trade it.
Right. Yeah, life has this grand plan for us and sometimes pushes us beyond our capacity. But if you stick through like you did, there can be a pot of gold at the end, and
And the pot of gold may not be, I'm going to physically be cured in the way that I'm saying right now. That may not happen.
mhm,
But this idea of I can have take on a deeper understanding of healing, which is like, I can integrate my experience as a human being, the parts of my personality, things that I've been pushing away. Uh, you know, this might be a deeper healing. And what's really exciting at this point is that my mindset is now, wow, I've only just begun this journey.
mhm,
I practiced mindfulness for decades. I thought I knew it all. I teach it to many people, brought it into educational settings. I'm on meditation apps, all of this. But in
mhm.
some ways, I'm just beginning myself. But I'm now armed with this hard earned perspective to say, hey, it's not just mindfulness, it's also this other therapeutic modality, the other things I've learned along the way. To say this is the approach to healing in life, is to realize if you engage in a certain kind of way, you can grow and you can heal in ways that you can't even imagine now. So I don't know where this is going to go, and it's very exciting to me.
I can imagine. In its simplest form, what you went through and how others could maybe see it is the placebo effect. Like if you'd have two people, one gets the drug and one doesn't, but more often than not, the people who got the placebo got better. And why is that? Because of the mind. It's all in the mind, and so our healing power is that comes within is untapped. I feel at this point in humanity, and there have been many spiritual people who have figured this out throughout the ages of man, but now we have the internet, so more people are starting to learn about it a lot quicker.
And what I've learned about the mind is the mind is smarter than we give it credit for. I mean, I was a psychology major in the 90s. That's what my bachelor's is in psychology. And it was kind of like you go through that unit on, like, Sigmund Freud, and it's like that's kind of a joke because you hear about kind of like the wacky sexual theories that he has and all. But when you actually peel it back and you look at the unconscious, you're like, no, 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 he was onto something here. Like the subconscious, and Carl Jung and many others, the subconscious mind can shut down the physical health of your body in order to get you to see, like, disowned parts of yourself. So the placebo effect is very, very real. And it also points to the complexity of the mind. So in my own particular healing, I don't think it was so much the placebo effect.
Hmm.
If anything, because I had this perfectionistic, I probably slowed down my own healing because I was very skeptical along the way. And especially when I got to this, I was like, this isn't going to work for me. And I know my mind better than anyone else. So I don't even think I personally had the benefit of the placebo effect,
Okay,
because
yeah.
I remember my mom along the way when I first, like, discovered this angle. She's like, you have a very strong personality. that might be working against you in this case. And I'm like, she doesn't know what she's talking about. Absolutely correct.
Interesting. So if you were to give one suggestion for someone who's just has some sort of chronic illness that they can't get over, or maybe a doctor can't put their finger on it, what would you suggest for them to start doing today to maybe open up their subconsciousness and start rewiring it?
If you're only going to give me one thing to
Okay,
do,
yeah,
'cause
as many
I,
as you want.
I could give 50, and there's
50,
only
go for
one.
it. Yeah, go for, okay.
Number one is going to be, you must get into the practice of being kind to yourself. And I saw this. This is where like my mindfulness, I would like kind of like look at the mind. And
Mhm.
there's something, I want to say this is my mind, but I don't think so. I think this is pretty universal, that when you feel pain and you're sick, there's a little piece of your mind, and it may be, I think it's informed by our society, that says it's your fault. You caused this. And it could be a little, but it's in there somewhere.
Mhm.
And I learned that especially with something like chronic fatigue syndrome, because you just have people outwardly saying this is fake. These are
Right.
fakers. So in my case, I never told anyone. I'm not gonna. What am I gonna say? So people can turn around and think that I'm like making something up.
Right.
So if you're gonna be, I don't care if it's cancer, chronic fatigue syndrome, or you twisted your ankle. If you're on the mend and you're healing, you have to really take seriously the potential for your mind to torment you, and to work against that and find techniques. There are many meditative techniques like loving kindness, journaling. And by the way, in my own healing, journaling was a huge part of that recovery.
Really?
You have to, we can get into that, but it was a huge part of the healing process, is really saying, listen, you're okay. Treating yourself like you would treat like a hurt 3-year-old, 4-year-old, 5-year-old.
Mhm.
It's not like a nice thing to do. It's an absolute necessity if you are facing any kind of illness.
Let's just go into that more. So what do you journal about? Like your day to day, how you're feeling, your condition? What else would you be journaling about?
So I follow, it was, this work is rooted in Dr. Sarno. And since he passed away, there are, what happened was he came up with these theories. He was an NYU orthopedist, and he came up with these theories in the 70s and the 80s, and he wrote this book, Healing Back Pain, and sold millions of copies. But his colleagues and coworkers rejected it. People didn't
Okay.
want to know about it. So they completely ignored it. They're in some ways tried to bury it and just delegitimize him. It's a sad and amazing story how this guy just lived his life completely just like a pariah, just not really, like, the world at large in some ways was recognizing him, but in his
Mhm.
own space he was not treated that way. So over the course of him doing this for 30, 40, 50 years, by the time he passed, there are now physicians, therapists. I went to a general practitioner who was trained by Sarno. All of these people were healed themselves under similar circumstances. So there's been enough of them now. So there's a new wave coming after him. And taking now, they've studied this scientifically to see that this is not like, we're not imagining this.
Mhm.
This is absolutely provable, that the brain can create all sorts of like physical conditions. In fact, one resource that culled them all together is an app called Curable, and it's put together by people who cured themselves under these methods. Um, but the journaling technique I found personally to be the biggest aid in that. And essentially, you journal, and you do it in a way that is raw, real. You say the things to the page that you would never say in real life, and
Okay.
you're afraid to admit to yourself, like, let's say you're married, and or let's say you have kids, and you turn around, you love your kids. You're the greatest mom, you're the greatest dad. You wouldn't trade your kids for anything, but
Mhm.
they're pissing you off so much. And you turn around and write in that page, I wish I never had them. I wish they weren't born. Why
Wow.
did this? Now that doesn't mean psychologically 10 minutes later you're going to put your kids on the open market, or you really, like, when you're done, you're going to rip this up. No one's going to read it, not even you, and you're not necessarily going to believe it. But what you've done is you've taken this like steam trapped in a steam pipe of your subconscious,
Mhm.
and you've released it from the valve. Many people who get these chronic pain and illness conditions, they have reached a level, they've hit the max. And
Mhm.
there's so much pressure in the back of their mind that there's no release for it. And that's why there's a certain type of personality, a perfectionistic type, who will push and push and push, or a goodist type and say, no, I don't hate anyone. I don't hate my kids. We all hate in a moment. And this is a socially acceptable way to vent these kinds of things. Now, if you're looking for someone who's an expert in this particular technique,
Mhm.
Nicole Sachs, Sachs.
Okay.
She has a podcast too, The Cure for Chronic Pain. Is she was trained by Sarno,
Okay. I I
And
see.
I just want to tell you one thing. Like, I teach the kids in New York City, and kids want to be cool. Like, we're going to do meditation, we're going to do mindfulness. Even though I know they like it, they have to put on that front.
Mhm.
Very trepidatiously, I introduced this technique to them on a Friday. Like, hey guys, I heard that this works. Like, I don't disclose all of what I'm telling you about myself, although I guess
Mhm.
they could find it now. Um, and, and I brought it to the kids, and to my surprise, the following week, can we do that again? Can we do that again? So the technique simplified is you set the timer for 20 minutes and you just write and write and write. Even if it seems like you're talking about nonsense, eventually you come to insights. And at the end of the 20 minutes, you get rid of it. And it's really beneficial to then just kind of sit for 10 minutes of meditation. And just like you've churned up your psyche. And now the meditation just lets it settle back down.
Mhm.
So, in the larger sense, as a guy who's a meditation teacher, Dharma teacher, meditative administrator in public schools, the mindfulness alone I found was incredible for the reasons that I've said, but it wasn't enough to get to the source of how I really felt about things. It was a meditative awareness, which is hugely valuable. But
Mhm.
when you take both a meditative awareness that sees experience non judgmentally, and you delve into the content and get clear about how you really feel over the course of time, I, in my own healing journey, have found this to be a very, very powerful combination. It's an integrated path to healing.
What would you say to someone who's listening to this or watching this and they're skeptical? They're like, I have had this, illness wrong with me for 5 years or a year or whatever it may be, and this guy's telling me to journal and I'm gonna get better. Like, what would you say just as to someone who might be skeptical?
You know, I would watch kind of podcasts like this when I was sick, and I would be waiting for their answer. And I don't mean to be cold when I deliver it. And I'm kind of like, my first gut answer, honestly, is I'm cured. So I hope you open your mind. If you don't, I'm still going to be cured, and I'm still going to go on with my life. And I know that has worked for me. But that would be a cold response. So let me unpack it a little bit.
Okay.
If you set the intention I'm going to do this and I'm going to be healed of my thyroid, of my pancreatic problem, of my chronic fatigue syndrome, of my migraine headaches, of my, you name it. You're setting conditions. It might be better to approach this that is something that's good for you in general. Like, just try something like this
Mm-hmm.
and see how it makes you feel. If you find that it makes you feel better, not cured, and I don't even mean physically, I'm not even talking about your body, you may still be sick and ill, but mentally, if you lowered your burden and you feel a little more able to deal with the physical illness you have, then it has proven its value. If you stick with it and then you find over the course of a few weeks, 2 months,
Mm-hmm.
that maybe you were getting migraine 7 days a week, and now 1 day a week you're not getting a migraine, and then a few months later only 2 days a week, this is now gravy.
Mm-hmm.
But just from your emotional, spiritual, psychological sanity, if it only helps you with that, that's good enough.
Yeah.
Really good. But for the record, though, I do think it will help conditions regardless. I do believe that. I just want people to know that. I just don't want to set the expectation so you have that bar, but I absolutely do believe it will help you.
And the importance of sticking with it and not just trying it for a day or 2 days and
Yeah.
expecting grand results, because it's not going to happen in 1 or 2 days. You need to stick with it and believe in yourself. Believe that it will happen.
But you don't know what the it is. So I'm
Good point.
glad you said that, because like, let's just look at the meditation and mindfulness. You know, there's a lot of bullshit with mindfulness where people promote this as, oh my God, you're gonna feel bliss and your mind is gonna be completely blank. What universe are you living in does this happen? It doesn't happen in mine. I've
Right.
been doing this for decades. I mean, here and there, like on long-term retreats, I've had some like really like kind of insane experiences, but that's not the point. The point is, how do you engage with your life? So if you come to, forget about the journaling and everything else, just a meditation practice, mindfulness, and
Hmm.
you think, I'm going to do it in order to have better experiences, you've already set yourself up for failure. What you're doing is you're really rewiring, changing how you relate to your experiences. As I said earlier, the pleasant ones, the unpleasant ones. So there are a lot of times I sit on that meditation cushion and I'm half asleep and I'm like this, and I'm watching it and I'm observing it and I'm seeing it. And I know that awareness is there and it's changing how I relate. This is rewiring the brain. This is powerful. I'm not trying to make my anxiety disappear by zapping it with mindfulness. That's now, this is an extreme term here, but there's a certain degree of violence with that,
Hmm.
right? Because we're trying to make something go away. It doesn't work like that. What we're trying to do, rather than make something disappear, is to create more space. There's this like famous kind of parable in the Buddhist tradition about how, the Buddha basically says, like, you know, which has the flavor of salt, a greater flavor of salt. If you take a glass full of water and you drop salt into it, or a pinch of salt, or if you go to like a freshwater lake and you drop a pinch of salt. Well, it's the glass, because it's so confined and it's so small, so that salt, it dominates. The same thing is true in our own experience. Mindfulness increases the spaciousness with which we hold the physical discomfort, the
Hmm.
illness, the stress, the shitty job, the boss we hate, the whatever it is, the good, the bad, the ugly. It increases the spaciousness. And from that point of view, it's like, whoa, this one thing is not occupying the real estate it used to. It's
Right.
now balanced out. And this, according to me, is like This is the real definition of healing, because you can deal with anything. And then if your thyroid problem goes away, all the better at that point. But even if it doesn't, you can deal with it.
Expanding the space into in order not to focus so much on it. That makes so much sense when we were talking about just meditation and mindfulness and an overall gets category, because if I'm trying to think out loud right now, but now it makes sense that expanding the consciousness really is expanding the space in order to not focus just on one thing and allow yourself just to be aware of everything.
Yeah, and when we say expand the consciousness too, I don't want people to get the idea of like now we're talking about woo woo type stuff and all of this. Like not even that. Like I'm not saying like oh consciousness and it. I mean it in a very literal like your awareness is aware. As I'm sitting to you, I feel my feet touching the floor. I feel
Mhm.
my butt making contact with the cushion that I'm sitting on right now. I felt like a little drop of sweat go down my back. I hear noise outside. I'm aware of what's happening, and this increases the spaciousness. So when I approach life, I'm approaching it with more spaciousness. That's what I'm meaning by consciousness, not like any kind of other, like, because when you get into the realm of spirituality, there's like, I hate to keep cursing here, but I'm going to do it. There's a lot of bullshit in spirituality. There's a lot of things that can't be proven, and people make claims. I don't know about all that. Maybe it's true, maybe it's not true. But what I know is living a daily life, going to a 9 to 5 job, having kids, not having kids, being married, not being married, whatever. Life is difficult. But when you can be more aware, you cultivate this spaciousness in your body, in your mind, in your life, and it pays dividends.
Do you feel that it's easier to practice this at an earlier age and develop that sense much easier? And as you're teaching children in New York, do you see them adapting this a lot quicker than as when you're teaching an adult?
There's one pitfall with kids, which is that I have when I teach to kids to adults and like let's say a Dharma center, the benefit that is I have with adults is that they're self-selected. They all want to be there. So if you put 20 kids in a room and 2 of them don't want to look like they're not cool and they kind of take on that like attitude, like the body language, it can in some ways like shut the room down because other kids are like, oh, I don't feel safe to like practice in this way. But if you're kind of diligent and you present it in kind of the proper way,
Hmm.
over time, I have found that almost everybody takes to this. But the advantage that kids have to adults is tremendous. They have not learned all of the garbage that we have at this point. So by the time someone's in their 30s and 40s, I see it all the time. They have all of these like defense mechanisms. And the biggest one, especially in New York City, is intellect. I could go to meditation center or wherever, and I have someone asking me all sorts of questions. And I'm like, let that go. What does your breath feel like? What do your feet feel like? A kid knows that. The kid goes right into it, and they're right there. It's funny because you look at like I'm not saying that this parable is to be literally taken true, but like again from the Buddhist tradition they have like the story of how like there would be like 7-year-olds who were supposedly fully enlightened, and it's like, all right, well what's that about? Like what's that supposed to mean? Is this canon of 80,000 teachings very specific on how to practice mindfulness? So how could a 7-year-old obviously can't grasp all of that? How could that happen to them? Again, I don't know that this is literally true, but metaphorically it makes sense. A 7-year-old just takes instructions. Feel your feet. Which feels warmer, your left foot or your right foot? Let's close our eyes. What does it feel like as the belly breathes in and breathes out? Like physically, what does it feel like? And they just do it.
Hmm.
And when they do it 100%. And what's remarkable about working with kids, I told you about, like, I am not Buddhist, by the way, and I'm not pushing it. It's not like my religion, but I am trained in that system of practice. What's really unbelievable is when you see a kid, an inner city kid from one of the boroughs of New York City, who's had no experience with any of that kind of thinking or teaching or anything,
Mhm.
and they on their own come out with a statement that confirms one of these teachings that were uttered 2,600 years ago, and you're like, oh my God, this is real. This kid just said something about the nature of change. Or it's one girl I used to teach. She was kind of, she had a hard type of personality, and she was a little angry, and she took this with this class I call mindful fitness. We have a whole curriculum that I developed years ago.
Mhm.
And by the way, scientifically, we brought in the school psychologist to measure the kids, and they had remarkable changes in their ability to focus attention, lower anxiety, all of these things. But she, during the course, we would practice our 8-minute meditation or whatever. And
Mhm.
this is what she would say. We'd go around the circle. If you want to share, you can share. If you don't have to. And she would say, when I do this, and she would put the biggest smile on her face, I am free.
Wow.
She was talking about the spaciousness that you and I just talked about it. She didn't
Mhm.
have the vocabulary for it, but she knew what it tasted like.
That's amazing, and that's humbling work that you're doing there. Teaching the kids that there are. I personally believe that if our children start learning this as they tie their shoes, our world would be changed, and likely a lot less illnesses. What do you think?
You know, it's hard for me to actually know the answer to that. It's tempting to say that's right. This is just going to cure all of life's problems, and everything's going to be great, and the world will unfold in a way that's completely compassionate and fair to everyone, and things are going to be great. I don't know. So I set my sights on one person at a time. And the first person is me.
Mhm.
And I do know that it can impact one person's world. And that's the world. Your world is the world. Right? Let's go to the Buddha for the third time. The entire world is contained in this fathom long body. We experience the world through our senses, through our
Mhm.
mind, through our heart, through all of it. And when we create that spaciousness, when we relate to it in a particular kind of way, the whole world changes. Our world does. Now, if people do this in mass, will the actual problems of the world go away? I don't know. But I'm interested in my world changing, your world changing, and anyone who I'm interacting with.
Yeah, if you don't change yourself, you can't change the world. That's that's just so true. And you hear that in so many different ways, but it starts within here. Through so th- maybe it's not a student, but through all this time that you've been involved in teaching Buddha, or being instructed in Buddha and meditation and mindfulness, and probably coming across other illnesses, are there any that stick out to you above the rest that you've seen somebody else heal from similar practice, that like how you healed?
From straight up mindfulness and meditation, I mean, it may very well be possible. I just haven't heard people tell me I have cured definitively from this condition from mindfulness alone. But the other therapeutic work with its mindful component, the work of Dr. Sarno and this whole movement, by the way, it's referred to as TMS. I don't even know what the T stands for, but if you look it up, Nicole Sachs, Dr. Sarno, I have seen many, many, many people in exactly the same way it happened to me. Like if I speak to one of these people who name the condition, whether it's um, inflammation of the body, or it's migraine headaches, or it's you name it. And by the way, that not only the chronic fatigue syndrome with me, like I used to have like gastric reflux, which was horrible. It's completely on all this medication, completely gone. Um,
Wow.
I had allergies that were horrible. I haven't gotten a cold in 2 years, like nothing. All of the little things went away. So when I feel now, this is my mindset. This is going to sound crazy to people, but I know in my bones at this point, when I feel some sort of symptom like fatigue or like something, I'm like, what am I not looking at? What's happening in my life right now? And that is a reliable, for me, 100% reliable. I go to the journal, which by the way, I still do 20
Hmm.
minutes a day, nearly every single day, sometimes 4 days a week, 5 days a week. But it's so rich. But that's now, I'm not like, give me Advil. Let me run to the doctor. Let me do this. What am I not looking at? I know how the mind and body interact now.
That is amazing right there. Just knowing that if you are feeling a symptom and instead of just trying to take an ibuprofen or an Advil or any other type of medication, if you sit down with yourself and look at what's causing it, what you're feeling that you're missing, that you can ultimately possibly heal yourself. That is remarkable.
The physician who trained me, I'll actually give him a plug. His name is Dr. Paul Gwodz, Gwodz, in New Jersey. He was trained by Dr. Sarno. He was an engineer. This guy was in his late 30s, and he had such severe back pain, he could barely get off the floor. And he, when Sarno was alive, went to Sarno, and he had 100% healing. It changed him so much. As an engineer at 39 years old, he went to med school at 40
Wow.
and became. I mean, I've never heard of anyone going to medical school at 40 years old and became a physician, just a general practitioner in a small town. Not everyone goes to him for this kind of stuff. And he's not even widely known. But he told me, he's like, I see people in front of me. And he pointed at the spot on the road right there. There was a woman who could barely walk. 2 days ago, she was dancing on that carpet right now. And
Incredible.
so these things happen.
Absolutely incredible. Well, guys, if you want to read more about how he gets involved in the school system, or you want to reach out to him personally for maybe some mindfulness tricks, how can our listeners get a hold of you, Brian?
I have a few talks on the web. I think maybe my website is probably the easiest way to go, which is brian-simmons.org. And there's also, I have a YouTube channel. During the pandemic, what I did was I interviewed some of the most incredible meditation teachers in the world. And I did it with the questions from the kids. And I had a student with me live. One of them was, ironically enough, John Kabat-Zinn, the original inspiration for my entire path. And we have that conversation. I tell him about all of that, which is it really, really like kind of a powerful moment. So the YouTube channel or my website. So yeah, I'm around.
Perfect. Well, you guys heard it from him. He is the living, breathing example that you can heal yourself without medicine. It's possible. Believe in it. You can do it. There is alternatives. And Brian, thank you so much for joining us today.
Jordan, it was a pleasure. Really, I'm glad that you're spreading this word, and I know that it's going to help people, and I'm very, very pleased to be part of it. Thank you.
Have a great day.